I'm Mike Wagner, Executive Director of the Buckeye Renewable Fuels Association, representing the ethanol industry in the state of Ohio. I'd like to talk about two things that hasn't been mentioned yet today that many people, including the Grocers Association and a lot of the media, don't understand about ethanol production. One is the distiller's dried grain. When you make ethanol, a third of the corn that you process comes out in a high-protein feed called distiller's dried grain. It's high in protein. The world needs protein. The hungry third world countries need protein. An example of how valuable distillers is, if a country in Africa is buying 3 boatloads of corn, they can buy all the protein in 1 boatload of distiller's dried grain, which cuts the cost tremendously. The distillers that Mark's going to produce at his plant in Lipstick, Ohio, will be 178,000 tons this year, in 1 year. So there's a huge credit that's got to come to the corn for this high-protein livestock feed. The second thing I want to mention is you hear so much about cellulosic ethanol. We need to move towards cellulosic ethanol. To do that, we need a strong first-generation ethanol that corn ethanol is. The second-generation ethanol plants, which will be cellulosic, feedstocks will be anything from switchgrass, rice straw, municipal waste, and other things. We have to have a strong base of knowledge and technology on the first generation ethanol and move to the second one, and infrastructure. So ethanol today, the corn ethanol industry, is so very, very important as a stepping stone to the future to make us less dependent on foreign oil. Thank you.
Rise this afternoon, again, the question remains, when are food prices coming down? What are you going to blame now? And the United States is still going to continue to advance efforts in alternative fuels. Even as gas prices and oil prices continue to climb, it's an important part of Ohio's economy, the U.S. economy, and Ohio farmers, such as John Davis and from Delaware County in the back of the room, and Steve Miller from Crawford County, can attest of their growing capabilities, the efficiency of their operations, and the ability for them to continue to produce food, feed, and fuel for Ohio consumers and U.S. and the United States. Thank you again for attending. I'm available for questions. Mike Wagner, Mark Bohr, and John Davis, and Steve Miller are also available for questions if you want to get a perspective of the Ohio corn, soybean, and wheat producer. Thank you very much.
Okay, you can take questions?
Yes, we'll take questions.
Right now?
Yes.
Why have corn prices come down?
I think if you look at the fundamentals of the corn industry, the fundamentals of the corn industry did not support $7 corn, $16 beans, $12 wheat. There was a lot of speculation in the marketplace. We saw that with oil. We see that with other commodities. But as the corn crop continues to grow in size, there's still that oversupply, that surplus of corn, as I noted early on. That U.S. farmers from last year's corn crop grew the surplus from just a little over 1 billion bushels to over 1.6 billion bushels. And the low value of the dollar had an impact on exports. That was one of the reasons why we saw an increase in exports globally, was the low value of the dollar. I think you saw exports across the board for agricultural commodities. Some estimate that those exports are going to decrease this year. The strength of the dollar, the world economies are in crisis, just as the U.S. economy is in crisis. But the corn market, soybean market, wheat market are coming back to the fundamentals that we've seen over time.
If you have a surplus year after year, why would corn growers go from 1 billion to 1.6 billion bushels?
Because we had a record production. Last year's corn crop was the greatest corn crop in the history of the world. But we went from a little over 11 billion bushels of production to 13.1 billion bushels of production. And I talked about
in the U.S.
In the U.S.
11 billion to 13 billion?
To 13 billion. So in a sense, in the United States, we saw an increase of 2.6 billion bushels of added availability. There's some carryover facts in there, there's some extra, and I can give you the breakdown of all the commodity and where the usage is going. and items like that. I was going to include that in the slide, but I said it was just too busy for everybody here today. But ethanol, and Mike touched on it, the distiller's grain. If we have 3 billion bushels of corn going into the ethanol industry, 1 billion bushels comes back in the form of distiller's grain. So that 3 billion bushels is not totally being used. It's only the starch portion of the corn. The protein portion, as Mark pointed out and Mike pointed out, comes back in the form of feed. So you have to get that credit back. So it's not all being consumed by the fuel industry.
But why would you produce more corn if you didn't use all your corn from last year?
And Steve and John could probably better answer that in terms of why does a producer make the growing decision. Keep in mind there's 300,000 independent farmers out there that do not collectively talk about what they're going to produce and what they're not going to produce for the upcoming year. A lot of that depends on input costs, it depends on crop rotations, and it also depends on weather. A wet spring, you'll see a transformation from growers that are anticipating planting corn. If it gets too late, they're going to start planting soybeans. And John or Steve, if you want to chime in on that question on why you produce what you produce, feel free to.
Would you mind? Can I add something? The other thing that's happening
Can
is
you get a mic, please?
Pardon me. The other thing that's happening is the farmers nationally are just getting better, more capable of growing corn, so yields are improving, which is very positive for ethanol in the future. So more corn can be used to create ethanol.